It is so great to be with you, and I wanted to thank Concerned Women of America for putting on this very informative and vital panel. I agree that the world we leave to our children is of the utmost importance. That's why I've brought the youngest of my 6 children, Richard Furchtgott, sitting over there in the corner, to hear all the important things that we have to say today about the debt and the deficit. And I'd like to start with something that Senator Rubio said yesterday. He said it's not that we need more tax revenue, we need more taxpayers. We don't need to raise more taxes. We need more people working who will pay income taxes and lower our deficit and reduce our debt. And he's absolutely right. Today I wrote a column for realclearmarkets.com called How to Create Jobs Without Spending a Dime. And it talks about the regulations that can be changed just with a phone call from the president that would enable us to create more jobs and lower our unemployment rate. There are almost 14 million Americans out of work. 45% of those have been out of work for 6 months or longer. Plus, our labor force participation rate is about the same as it was in the summer of 1984, midway in that decade when millions of women were moving into the labor force. So if we include discouraged workers also, and workers who are marginally attached to the labor force, our unemployment rate is closer to around 16%, the Labor Department has said. Well, what can President Obama do to fix things? Things like repealing Obamacare, altering Dodd-Frank and Sarbanes-Oxley, that requires Congress to get together and pass a new set of laws, and then that maybe would take some more time. But right now, there's the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Labor, National Labor Relations Board, the Department of the Interior. These are all staffed with his appointees. They are capable of changing their regulations just like that, altering the focus of their efforts that would make it easier for Americans to get jobs and be employed. Just to take a few obvious examples, the Department of Interior is holding up deep water drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. Thousands of people are unemployed in those Gulf states, and some of the oil rigs that were there have moved away, a couple down to Brazil, where President Obama visited in the spring and said how he admired their energy development, and he hoped that we could buy energy from them. Well, why should we be buying energy from them when our oil rig could be there, employing American workers and getting our own oil out of the ground? Similarly, the Environmental Protection Agency is launching a new war against coal, which produces 45% of our energy. Today, in fact, at noon, they released another set of regulations, these ones governing emissions that cross state lines. They had already released emissions that will make it very difficult to burn coal in utility boilers, electric generators, steam boilers. So what they want to do is make the emissions requirements so difficult that we won't be able to use coal anymore, and coal-fired plants will have to close down. This is going to drive up the cost of electricity, and it's going to adversely affect the employment of thousands of people, especially in Midwestern states that are already suffering from high unemployment. At the same time, the Labor Department is waging its own war on coal. The Mine Safety and Hazard Administration is trying to ratchet up standards for dust, or I should say ratchet down. They want less dust allowed in the coal mines. So that would mean that we couldn't even produce the coal. Now we are exporting about 70 million tons of coal, exporting it to places like China, which are growing at 7, 8, 9% a year because they don't have any qualms about using fossil fuels. Neither should EPA. EPA's data on its own website show that our emissions have gone down steadily since 1980 and are forecast to go down more as old cars get taken off the road and Americans buy newer, more efficient cars. So emissions have steadily gone down. Our air has got steadily cleaner. So what do they say that we need cleaner air for? Well, health effects for Americans, they say, will be healthier if we have fewer emissions in the air. But interestingly enough, last night I looked at the CDC, Centers for Disease Control website, which shows that between 1980 and 2001, the prevalence of asthma has tripled. So as our air has got cleaner, incidence of asthma is going up. So if it's even cleaner as the EPA wants it to be, probably asthma will quadruple. In other words, the health benefits of getting the additional emissions out of the air are not supported by some of the scientific studies. Just to move on to a few more regs that the president could change with a wave of his hand, the free trade agreements, he could take leadership in pushing these through and getting them ratified by the Congress. Hundreds of thousands of Americans are employed in industries that export and firms that export. China is signing an agreement with Colombia. They are taking some of the business that we would have with our free trade agreements if our free trade agreement was actually implemented. We need to be producing more goods for export. That solves more unemployment problems. I shouldn't let this rest without mentioning, of course, the most infamous destroyer of jobs, the National Labor Relations Board. So Boeing has built a new plant in North Charleston, South Carolina, because it has a backlog of Dreamliner aircraft. Oh, it needs to have more than 800 more of these aircraft because it has a backlog on orders. So the National Labor Relations Board, acting attorney, lead attorney, acting general counsel, Leif Solomon, has charged Boeing, saying that Boeing should not have opened the new plant in South Carolina. Any additional plant should be opened in Washington State. Even though Boeing hasn't laid off any workers in Washington State, and that plant is working at capacity, and it needs to build a new one, and there are natural reasons why a company would want to build a new plant in a lower-cost state such as South Carolina, the NLRB wants this plant to close or not to produce Dreamliners. So that sends a chilling effect, not just in Boeing, but any other company that wants to locate in the United States. Because if they think the NLRB is going to stop them expanding elsewhere, then there are very real costs. They're basically tied to one state, the first state they locate in. And if Boeing had built its additional plant in China, the way Airbus did, the NLRB wouldn't have had the authority to ask it to close it down. Plus, the NLRB has just come out with new regulations for quick union elections rather than the period now, which is about 45 to 60 days. It wants to hasten this to 7 days to 2 weeks. And something that I would imagine would be illegal or unconstitutional, they want to choose the arbitration group after the vote. So after all the votes are collected, then the idea is they would go back and pick which votes counted in the vote for union representation. It's as though not only taking away the right to a secret ballot, but having the vote count whether it counts after instead of before the election is decided. Well, there's so much more I could talk about, such as project labor agreements, which is something President Obama thought about, where we would have extra high wages for federally funded projects. Projects over $25 million would not just be subject to the usual minimum wage and Davis-Bacon agreements, but a kind of super Davis-Bacon. Of course, the higher the cost, the more trouble the state budget is in, and also the fewer people it can employ. But I could go on all day, but there's so much more to say from the other speakers. And I want to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to tell you about some of these ways where we could really be increasing employment. And tomorrow we're going to get the new set of jobs numbers. And, even if they fall by a whole percentage point to 8.1%, unemployment is still too high and a full percentage point above what it was when President Obama took office. Thank you very much.